When I was 17, my dad remarried. I was already halfway out the door by then, working part-time, saving up for college, and counting the months until graduation. But his new wife, Linda, came with a perfectly manicured smile, a 15-year-old daughter named Rachel, and a clipboard personality. You know the type. Everything's a checklist, and if you're not on it, you don't exist. My name's Aaron. I'm 24 now. But this story starts just after I turned 20 and had to move back home. College didn't go the way I'd planned. I got into a decent school on partial scholarship, picked up 2 jobs to cover the rest, and still fell short when tuition spiked during my second year. I didn't tell anyone back home. I just packed up, withdrew before they could charge me for the semester, and drove 12 hours back to the house I hadn't seen in almost 3 years. My dad was surprised, to put it nicely. He didn't hug me, didn't ask what went wrong, just stood in the doorway, blinking like I'd interrupted something important. Linda appeared a second later, holding her ever-present glass of white wine, the kind that never seemed to go empty. She looked me up and down and said, "We thought you were doing well." I said, forcing a smile. "Just need a place for a bit. Only until I get back on my feet." Dad scratched the back of his neck. "Yeah, we can figure something out." They gave me the room in the basement. It used to be my space back in high school. Unfinished concrete walls, a mattress on a metal frame, a desk I built out of scrap wood and zip ties, but it hadn't changed much. Linda made a big show of letting me use the upstairs bathroom, as if that was some kind of prize. Rachel had grown into her mother's twin, same judgmental stare, same perfect blonde hair, same way of turning every comment into a passive-aggressive jab wrapped in a compliment. The first few weeks, I kept my head down. I got a job delivering groceries, started applying to community colleges, and tried not to make waves. But little things started piling up. My laundry would get moved from the washer mid-cycle. My food would mysteriously disappear from the fridge. One day, my laptop charger vanished, and when I asked around, Rachel shrugged and said, "Maybe you should keep better track of your stuff." Dad just sipped his coffee and said, "She didn't mean it like that." I knew what was happening. I wasn't family. I was an intruder in their suburban castle. Linda ran that house like it was her kingdom, and I was the unwelcome guest tracked in on someone's boots. Still, I kept quiet. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd be out by spring. I even offered to help with groceries and utilities, but Linda brushed it off with a laugh. "Don't worry about it. You're barely here anyway." That would have been fine if she hadn't turned around and used my lack of contribution as a talking point whenever we had guests over. One Sunday, we had family friends over for dinner, Linda's sister and her husband, people I barely knew. I came up to eat, sat quietly, and tried to make polite conversation. Halfway through the meal, Linda mentioned that Rachel had made honor roll, and everyone clapped and cooed like she'd cured cancer. I smiled and said, "That's awesome. Congrats, Rachel." Rachel rolled her eyes. "Well, some of us are actually doing things with our lives." There was an awkward silence. I looked at my dad, expecting him to say something. He just laughed, and said, "You're just a guest in this house, Aaron. We've all agreed you don't contribute." My heart thudded in my chest. I looked around the table. Linda nodded like it was the most normal thing in the world. Rachel smirked and took another bite of mashed potatoes. No one said a word. No one even looked uncomfortable. They'd rehearsed this. Practiced it, maybe. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't remind them that I'd been paying the electric bill quietly for 3 months because I knew things were tight after Dad's hours got cut. I didn't mention that the Wi-Fi they all used every single day was in my name, paid on my card, because their provider had flagged Dad's account as delinquent. I didn't remind them that I'd cooked 3 dinners that week, or that I'd driven Rachel to her part-time job twice when Linda's car wouldn't start. I just stood up, walked downstairs, grabbed my keys, and left. No note, no scene, just silence. I slept in my car that night. Then I found a cheap room to rent from a guy I knew from high school who'd just moved in with his girlfriend and needed someone to take over the lease. It was tiny, barely bigger than a walk-in closet, but it was mine. I picked up extra shifts, canceled auto pay on a few things, blocked everyone in that house. Didn't look back, but I still got the emails, the payment reminders, the usage alerts. I waited, and 2 months later, something shifted. But I'll get to that. Let me tell you first about everything that happened in between, because that dinner was just the start of it. If you've ever wondered what it feels like to be a ghost in your own family, let me tell you. it's not always loud. Sometimes, it's death by 1,000 little silences. After that dinner, the one where my dad laughed and called me a guest, I kept replaying that moment in my head like a broken cassette. Not because it was the first time something like that had happened, but because it was the first time I finally believed them. For years, I held on to this naive belief that things would get better, that I just had to be more patient, more helpful, more understanding, that if I played the role of the quiet, dependable son long enough, they'd eventually see me, really see me. But that night, when I watched my father laugh like he'd been waiting to deliver that line for weeks, something cracked. And once it cracked, it didn't stop. The weeks that followed were a slow-motion avalanche, building toward a betrayal I didn't see coming until it was already beneath my feet. When I left that night, I didn't slam the door or scream or cry. I just got in my car and drove until the gas light came on. I parked behind a closed hardware store and sat there, trying to feel something. Anger, grief, shame, anything that made sense. But mostly I just felt numb, like I'd been cut loose from gravity. I scrolled through my contacts, thumb hovering over names I hadn't dialed in years. Friends who'd moved on, cousins who barely remembered me. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there until sunrise, then found a gas station bathroom to wash my face and pretended I was fine. The guy I ended up renting from, Chris, was an old classmate. We weren't close, but he remembered me well enough to toss me the keys without asking too many questions. His old room was barely 10 by 10, with a warped floor and a view of someone else's crumbling fence, but it had a door I could lock and a window I could open. It was heaven compared to that basement. I paid him cash weekly and picked up extra shifts delivering groceries, washing cars, even assembling furniture for rich families too lazy to read manuals. Hustle became my therapy. The busier I was, the less I had to think. I figured they'd reach out. At least my dad. I thought maybe he'd text, wondering where I went. Maybe Linda would send one of her faux-concerned messages. We were worried, just checking in. Maybe Rachel would gloat. But nothing came. A full week passed. Then two. I didn't hear a single word from that house. But the bills kept coming. The Wi-Fi I'd been paying for? Still running. The electric account tied to my email? Still active. My cloud drive? Still full of Rachel's school documents and Linda's vacation photos. For a moment, I considered shutting it all down right then. Just flip the switch, make a clean break. But part of me, some sick, petty part, wanted to see how long it would take before they noticed. So I waited. Week 3 was when the real unraveling started. Chris had an open kitchen plan, and sometimes at night when I was eating cereal straight from the box, we'd talk about life. I never told him the full story, but one night he asked why I looked so wrecked, and I spilled more than I meant to. He didn't say much, just nodded and listened. But before bed, he knocked on my door and said, "Sometimes people only learn respect when the power goes out." Just saying. I didn't do anything then, but the idea stuck. I tried not to think about them, but life had other plans. The first time I saw them again was a month later, at the grocery store. I was bagging orders at the express line, and there they were, Linda and Rachel, standing in line with a cart full of overpriced snacks and wine bottles. Rachel saw me first. She did that thing where she pretends not to know you, eyes sliding right past mine like I was invisible. Linda, though, she smiled. "Look who's working hard," she said, loud enough for the people in line to hear. "Bet you never thought you'd be the one bagging our groceries." I didn't respond. I just kept scanning items, hands steady, heart pounding. She leaned in slightly. "Glad to see you landed on your feet. Not everyone's cut out for college." That was the moment I realized something. They weren't embarrassed. They weren't awkward or regretful or even curious about why I left. They were smug, like they'd won some game I didn't know we were playing. I finished their transaction, handed over the receipt without a word, and watched them walk away like I was just another employee in their path. I didn't cry after that. I didn't get angry. I just got quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before a storm. The betrayal came a week later. I was sitting on the porch of Chris's place, checking email after a long shift, when I saw a strange notification. A login attempt from an unfamiliar device on my college student portal. At first, I thought it was spam, but then another alert popped up, password reset successful. I froze. I hadn't logged into that portal in months. But it still had all my personal data, transcripts, financial aid records, loan applications. I opened the account, heart racing. It had been completely accessed. Files downloaded. My name listed as a parental sponsor on a new FAFSA application. I scrolled through, piecing it together. Rachel had applied to a college, some private liberal arts school in Vermont, and they'd used my account. My credentials, my tax information, everything. I checked my email again. Buried deep in the spam folder was an automatic confirmation from the Department of Education. Congratulations, your dependent has submitted her FAFSA. The dependent, being Rachel. And the parent on file? Me. I couldn't breathe. I called the number listed in the application, pretending to be her guidance counselor. The woman on the line was polite, if distracted. When I asked for the name of the person listed as the financial guarantor, she read off my full name. Aaron Ellis. My date of birth. My address, my old address. They'd stolen my identity. Used it to apply for financial aid. Possibly even loans. It wasn't just a slap in the face. It was a brick through the window of everything I had left. I stared at the screen, trying to make it make sense. But I already knew. Rachel must have still had access to the Wi-Fi portal. Or the old shared cloud account. My documents had been sitting there for months. And they took them. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't eat the next day. I just sat there, staring at my laptop, watching as the people who told me I didn't contribute used me to fund their daughter's future. The irony would have been funny if it didn't feel like a knife. I wanted to confront them. Drive back to that house. Bang on the door, demand answers. But something held me back. Maybe pride. Maybe logic. Maybe that same petty, quiet fire that had started burning back at that dinner table. I opened a new browser tab. Looked up the service providers tied to my name. The electric company. The internet. The shared cloud drive. I pulled up every statement, every auto payment. Everything I'd been quietly shouldering while being called a guest. And then, for the first time in months, I smiled. Because if they thought I didn't contribute, I was about to show them exactly what that meant. But first, I had to be sure. I needed evidence. I needed to know just how deep this rabbit hole went. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my mom. And that's when things really started to spiral. The phone rang 5 times before she answered. That brief moment between the 4th and 5th ring stretched into a lifetime, and I nearly hung up. But then her voice came through, cautious but soft. Aaron, I hadn't spoken to my mom in nearly 2 years. Not because we'd fought, not really. Just drifted. She moved 3 states away after the divorce, remarried, and started fresh. I didn't blame her. My dad made it easy to want to leave. But when I left for college, we fell out of rhythm. A missed birthday here, a delayed text there, and suddenly months passed. Then a year. Then 2. Hey, I said, trying not to let my voice crack. I need help. That silence again. But this time it felt different. Like she was holding her breath on the other end. Are you okay? I laughed. A dry, bitter thing that sounded foreign in my throat. Not really. But I will be. Just can I come by? Of course you can, she said instantly. You don't even have to ask. I borrowed Chris's car the next day and made the drive. For hours of winding hills and slow traffic gave me too much time to think. About what I'd say. About how I looked. About the last time I'd sat across from her. I didn't realize how much weight I'd been carrying until I stepped into her kitchen and saw the faint lines of worry vanish from her face as she hugged me. She made tea. I told her everything. Slowly. At first, like testing the temperature of a pool before diving in. But once I started, I couldn't stop. The dinner, the silence, the bills, the FAFSA betrayal. All of it. When I finished, she sat there for a moment, just watching me. Then she stood up, walked to the counter, and unplugged the tea kettle like she needed to do something with her hands. You know, she said slowly, your father once told me he didn't think you had a backbone. I blinked. What? After we divorced. He said you were soft like me, that you'd never stand up for yourself. That's why he fought so hard to keep you after the split. Not because he wanted custody, but because he knew I would have actually supported you. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't crack, but I felt the weight of every word. I should have fought harder, she added, almost to herself. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. She helped me dig through every document, every login, every transaction. She even found an old notebook of mine I'd left behind, pages filled with budget plans, dreams, to-do lists I'd scribbled when I was still idealistic. I didn't recognize the kid who wrote them, but my mom did. She ran her fingers over the page and said, "That's the Aaron I remember." That night, I slept in a real bed for the first time in months. No basement mildew, no thin mattress or drafty windows. Just quiet. Just peace. But the storm wasn't over. I called FAFSA the next morning. Explained everything. They flagged the account for fraud and told me to submit a formal report. I sent in copies of my ID, tax statements, proof of address changes. It would take weeks, they said, possibly months. I asked what would happen to Rachel's application in the meantime. The woman paused, then said, if it's confirmed that the information was stolen, she could be disqualified from federal aid entirely. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just ended the call and stared at my hands. I was exhausted. The fallout came slowly. Linda tried to be sneaky. I'd shut down the Wi-Fi, the electric, and the cloud access the day before, but it took them a few days to notice. I still had the admin access to the router and could see which devices were trying to connect. Rachel's iPhone, Dad's old laptop. Even Linda's Kindle kept trying to refresh. It was almost funny. And then came the texts. Blocked numbers. Fake numbers. Unknown callers. I didn't respond, but I kept the messages. Screenshotted them. Added them to my growing folder of evidence. One night, Dad finally left a voicemail. His voice was low, like he was trying not to be heard. Hey, Aaron. Look, I don't know what's going on, but your stepmom's real upset. Rachel too. The internet's out, and, it says the electric bill hasn't been paid. Did something happen with your account? Can you give me a call when you get this? I didn't. I wanted him to sit in that silence. I wanted him to taste the void he'd helped create. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. I found a new job, not delivering groceries, but working at a local IT firm. Entry level, sure, but it paid better and had room to grow. Chris helped me clean up my resume, and my mom even paid for a new set of clothes for the interview. For the first time in months, I felt like I had direction. The funny thing was, I didn't have a grand revenge plan. Not yet. I wasn't trying to ruin them. I just wanted my name off their lips. My energy back in my own hands. But life has a way of rewarding patience, and over the next few weeks, the pieces began falling into place. One of the clients at the IT firm had a daughter in the same school Rachel applied to. Over lunch one day, he mentioned a bizarre story he'd heard about a girl who got her federal aid frozen because of a flagged identity issue. I stayed quiet, but my blood turned to ice. A week later, another email, this time from a college admin account, notifying me that I'd been removed as a financial sponsor. The application had been voided. Rachel's application status, rejected pending verification. They were scrambling. Linda tried emailing me, begging, then threatening. First it was, please fix this, you know we need it. Then, you'll regret this. We can talk to lawyers. I forwarded the emails to the fraud report inbox and marked them unread. Dad stopped trying to call. I assumed he was waiting for me to cool down. He didn't realize I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. But Rachel made one last mistake. One night, I checked the cloud account. I hadn't deleted it yet. Part of me wanted to make sure I had everything backed up first. That's when I saw a new folder, shared to a private drive. Her name on it. A college essay draft. Then another. Then screenshots of my documents. My tax info. My ID. She'd uploaded it all again. Maybe for safekeeping. Maybe because she still thought she'd get away with it. I took screenshots. Downloaded the IP logs. Printed everything. Then I closed the account for good. And just like that, my digital footprint in that house disappeared. With each week, I got stronger. The job kept me busy. I started running again. Chris and I painted the apartment, rearranged the furniture, made it feel like home. My mom visited once a week. Sometimes I'd cook. Other times we'd just sit and watch reruns of old shows I loved as a kid. There was no drama, no performance, just two people trying to rebuild what should have never been broken. One night, she asked me something that stuck with me. If they apologized, would you forgive them? I didn't answer right away. I don't think they're capable of apologizing, I said finally. At least not in a way that means anything. They don't see what they did as wrong. To them, I'm just being dramatic. Or selfish. Or ungrateful. She nodded. But would you want to forgive them? I sat with that. Part of me did. Just for the closure. But another part, the part that had grown tougher, sharper, more self-assured, didn't want to give them that satisfaction. I don't know, I said. Maybe someday. But not today. She squeezed my hand. That's okay. That night, I wrote in a journal for the first time in years. I didn't plan it. Just picked up a pen and started. Page after page of everything I'd wanted to say, but never could. I wrote until my hand cramped. Until the ink smeared. Until the weight in my chest didn't feel so heavy. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. But it was healing. And as it turned out, revenge would come anyway. But not for me. Not directly. Because 2 weeks later, something happened that would flip everything upside down. Something I didn't expect. I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a printed copy of Rachel's college rejection letter and a sticky note in neat, block handwriting. Thought you should see what happens when people lie. No signature. No explanation. But I knew who sent it. And I realized someone else in that house wasn't playing by the family rules anymore. It took me a full 10 minutes to process what I was holding. The envelope was plain, like any other piece of boring mail. No handwriting, no stamp, just my name printed in block letters and slipped into my mailbox like someone had placed it there by hand. Inside, the rejection letter from Rachel's college, complete with their official seal, the cold wording of application denied, and that sticky note. Thought you should see what happens when people lie. The handwriting was neat, blocky, gender neutral. Could have been anyone. But as I sat at the kitchen table, rereading that line again and again, my gut told me what my brain wasn't ready to say out loud. Someone inside that house was flipping sides. At first, I assumed Rachel had sent it herself, some twisted cry for help or guilt offering. But that didn't make sense. She wasn't the type to admit defeat, let alone confess to lying. And besides, if she wanted to make peace, there were easier ways to reach me. This wasn't peace. This was a warning shot, a message disguised as a gift. And it worked, because after months of silence, I suddenly felt seen. Not in the way I used to crave, the desperate hunger for acknowledgement from my father, but in a new, sharper way. Like someone had cracked open the front door just wide enough for me to see that the whole house was full of rot. All I had to do now was decide what I wanted to do with that knowledge. The next morning, I sat in Chris's kitchen with 2 cups of coffee and a plan swirling around in my head. He walked in, bleary-eyed and shirtless, and grunted something close to a greeting. "I have a question," I said, sliding one of the mugs across the table. "You're buying breakfast?" "No. Bigger." He raised an eyebrow. "Would you help me destroy my family?" To his credit, he didn't flinch, just sipped his coffee and nodded slowly. Emotionally, financially, or publicly, I laughed for the first time in weeks. "Let's say all 3. He leaned forward. "Now that's how you start a morning." Before I did anything, I needed leverage. And not just petty screenshots or unpaid bills. I needed the kind of proof that would speak for itself. Something irrefutable. Something that wouldn't just embarrass them, but expose them. I started by revisiting every digital account I'd ever shared with that household. Years ago, back when Dad still pretended to care, he'd added me to the family phone plan. At the time, it was a kind gesture. Something to lighten your load, kiddo. But after I moved out for college, I started paying my portion directly, and later, I took over the full account when his credit dipped too low to maintain it. I kept the plan active for Rachel and Linda, thinking it would help the family. Big mistake. Big opportunity. Because even though I'd wiped my presence from most of their services, I'd forgotten one thing: the phone records. With a few clicks, I downloaded a 6-month activity log. Every number called, every text sent, every app used. I wasn't trying to spy on them. I didn't want their drama. But if they were bold enough to use my identity for federal fraud, I wanted to see what else they'd done with the tools I gave them. The logs were enlightening. There were regular calls to a financial planner I didn't recognize. Dozens of late-night texts between Linda and someone named M. Frequent app use that suggested some kind of side hustle Rachel was running. Maybe tutoring, maybe something less honest. But what caught my eye was a recurring number tied to a real estate agency in town. Curious, I called. "Hi, this is Jessica from Manor Ridge Realty," the voice chirped. "Are you calling about the listing on Halston Drive?" I blinked. "Oh yeah? Just wondering if the sellers are still looking to close." "They are. The offer's already been accepted, but we're finalizing some of the paperwork." "You're with the buyer's team, right?" I hesitated. "Remind me of the name again?" She rattled it off. "Linda Ellis." My heart skipped. They were selling the house. My house. The one my grandparents paid off. The one my mom fought for during the divorce, but lost in court because my dad pulled strings and claimed he'd raise me there. That house was never meant to belong to Linda. But now, she was selling it. No call. No explanation. Just erasing history. And that's when it clicked. That was my leverage. I drove back to my mom's place that weekend with a file folder full of documents and a whiteboard from Chris's closet. I laid everything out on the dining room table and told her everything, from the phone logs to the real estate call. She listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes like a lawyer preparing for court. When I finished, she tapped the table. Okay, here's what we do. She outlined a plan so methodical it made my head spin. I forgot sometimes that my mom worked in finance before the divorce. She'd been the quiet powerhouse behind the scenes, managing bills, investments, and mortgage logistics while Dad played the role of suburban king. When the divorce came, she gave up the house to avoid a messy custody battle. But now she was ready to fight. We'll file a claim of contested ownership, she explained, flipping through documents. Your name was never added to the deed. But if we can prove you were a financial contributor and had been paying utilities or maintaining property expenses, we have a shot at delaying the sale. But even if it's not in my name, that's where the fraud comes in, she said, eyes gleaming. If we show the house was used as the address for illegal applications and that your identity was part of those actions, we can tie the two together. At the very least, we can delay the escrow process long enough to raise questions. Chris, sitting nearby, added, You'll be a nightmare for the buyers. They'll back out. I nodded slowly. And when the house sale collapses, they'll lose everything they've been banking on, Mom finished. I stared at the whiteboard, heart pounding. This wasn't petty anymore. This was chess. And I had the board. But we weren't done. Chris had a friend named Lyle, a cybersecurity consultant who owed him a favor. I told Lyle everything, leaving out names, but giving just enough detail to pique his interest. When I mentioned the stolen FAFSA data and shared cloud drive, his eyes narrowed. They used your documents across multiple platforms. Yeah, I think they copied my ID, taxes, even my social security number. He whistled. That's more than fraud. That's a felony. You press hard enough, someone's looking at jail time. Can you help me trace the usage? Maybe tie it to devices or IPs. Absolutely. You still have access to the logs. I handed over a USB drive. Lal plugged it into his laptop and grinned. Let's burn them to the ground. The next 2 weeks felt like a montage in slow motion. We compiled a portfolio, timestamps of logins from their home network, screenshots of Rachel's essay folder containing my private info, utility bills addressed to me, FAFSA submissions, IP logs, and now, the real estate listing that tied it all together. It was meticulous, clean, devastating. My mom contacted a real estate attorney through her firm and filed the paperwork to challenge the sale of the house based on fraudulent misuse of the property address tied to criminal activity. That alone was enough to trigger a temporary freeze. Meanwhile, I sent a quiet tip to Rachel's prospective school about the fraudulent application and the evidence we'd submitted to the Department of Education. They'd already rejected her. But now, they opened a formal investigation. Linda tried reaching me again, this time from a new email. Aaron, this is getting out of hand. You need to stop. You're ruining your sister's future. Think about what you're doing. We took you in. We supported you. You're acting like we're strangers. I read it 3 times, then forwarded it to the fraud case handler. No reply. By the time the 3rd week rolled around, the storm was brewing on all sides. The house sale was stalled. FAFSA had launched an inquiry. And my dad? He finally called. This time, he left a longer voicemail. Tired. Flat. Look, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this isn't right. You're tearing this family apart. Linda's stressed out, Rachel's crying every day, and now we've got lawyers calling. Whatever grudge you're holding on to, just let it go, son. You're better than this. I stared at my phone. Better than this? This from the man who let his wife call me a guest at my own dinner table, who let his daughter steal my future and treat it like a stepping stone, who watched me walk out without even standing up. I deleted the voicemail, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilt. I felt power, but I wasn't done, because a week later, the final piece of the puzzle landed in my lap, a document forwarded from Lyle, a PDF from an unsecured cloud drive, Linda's full tax return, filed jointly with my father. And guess what name was listed under dependents? Mine. For the 4th year in a row, they've been claiming me on their taxes, collecting benefits, getting credits, while telling me to my face I didn't contribute. And that's when I knew it was time to finish what they started. The thing about revenge, real, lasting revenge, is that it doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't scream or kick down doors. It whispers. It waits. It lets the guilty dig their own grave while you quietly hand them the shovel. and I was done handing out shovels. After discovering they'd been claiming me as a dependent on their taxes for 4 straight years, years in which they told me I didn't contribute, didn't matter, didn't belong, I knew it was time to end this. The stolen FAFSA, the utilities I'd paid for, the property sale, the attempted cover-ups, it was all connected now. I had enough documentation to build a case folder taller than my dad's delusion. But I wasn't doing this for revenge alone. I was doing it to get myself back. And that started with one final move. I met with the IRS Fraud Division on a rainy Wednesday. I brought everything. Utility bills with my name and their address, screenshots of tax return forms showing me listed as a dependent, bank statements proving I paid for services tied to their home. My mom came with me. So did Chris, mostly for moral support and because he wanted to wear a tie he never got to use. The agent, Ms. Durham, was calm, professional, and disturbingly enthusiastic. I suppose cases like mine don't show up often, where the victim walked in with everything sorted, cataloged, and timestamped down to the hour. She asked careful questions, took copies of everything, and promised to follow up. 3 weeks later, I received official confirmation an investigation had been launched. If they found what I presented to be accurate, and there was no doubt they would, Dad and Linda could face tax fraud charges, fines, and disqualification from filing certain deductions in the future. That was the spark, but it was the fire I was waiting for. The real estate lawyer my mom connected me with sent a formal letter of contestation to the buyer's agency. It cited material misrepresentation of household ownership and ongoing legal review tied to the property's usage. It was enough to freeze escrow indefinitely. Within a week, the buyers backed out. Linda must have lost her mind, because 2 days later, I received a message on an old backup email account she probably thought I forgot existed. You're trying to ruin us, but you're just proving how bitter and small you are. You'll always be the same pathetic loser who needed us to survive. That was the last straw. I replied with a single sentence. Check with the IRS about who really needed who. Then I blocked her. Rachel wasn't silent either. Through mutual acquaintances, people I hadn't spoken to since high school, I started hearing the fallout. Word spread fast in small towns, especially when someone's college dreams fall apart mid-semester. Turns out her enrollment had been contingent on financial aid, which was now frozen indefinitely. The school launched their own academic honesty inquiry after I sent them the full record of the identity theft tied to her application. They didn't expel her. They withdrew her. She didn't even get to pack her dorm. She was sent home midweek, her student email deactivated before she hit the driveway. I didn't gloat. Okay, maybe for 10 seconds, I let myself smile. But only 10. The final domino fell when the IRS sent a letter to my father. Or, more precisely, they sent me a copy of the letter they'd sent him. It stated that the fraudulent dependent claims were being formally reviewed and that back taxes, penalties, and interest might apply. It didn't say how much. But based on the numbers I'd run with my mom's help, I estimated at least $18,000. And the best part? Since they filed jointly, Linda was on the hook too. It wasn't jail, but it was justice. I never heard from my dad directly again. Not even when the house went into pre-foreclosure after the buyer pulled out, and they failed to secure a new one. Not when utilities were shut off due to unpaid bills I'd previously been covering. Not even when Rachel posted a cryptic rant on social media that included lines like, "Some people can't handle success, and snakes in the family always bite the hand that fed them." I ignored it all, because I wasn't that scared kid in the basement anymore. I was someone who rebuilt himself from the ground up, who learned that silence is sometimes the loudest response, who stopped waiting for a family that never saw him as more than a convenience, and became his own home instead. I got promoted at work. Chris and I moved into a bigger apartment. My mom and I kept rebuilding our relationship one dinner at a time. Life didn't magically become perfect, but it became mine again. And in the end, I didn't destroy them. I just stopped holding them up. They collapsed all on their own.